People who knew someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? When I was a 13-year-old boy, I witnessed my grandfather die. He was less than 15 feet away from me when he was decapitated by shrapnel from a broken piece of heavy farm equipment. I'm 50 years old and still struggle with that moment in time. PTSD can be a real bitch. A friend of a friend showed up at his girlfriend's apartment with a head wound. He didn't know how it happened. He also didn't know how he drove over there. She took him to the ER where he ended up passing away. He had his keys, wallet, and phone on him. The only thing we could think of is he might have tripped, fell and hit his head in the wrong spot. My neighbor was cleaning his gutters and fell off his roof because he missed his footing when stepping. Fell right on his head. This was a few years back now, but the family moved quickly after, even though it had been their house for like 30 years. I can't say I blame them. A friend slipped and fell in the tub. Cracked his head. His roommate found him a half hour later. Died on the way to the hospital. Girl I grew up with was driving home in college and go into a horrible car accident that gave her brain damage and pretty much removed her jaw from her skull. Tons of surgery, and 3 years later, she walked down the aisle at her wedding. She was in her yard a few months after her wedding and slipped, tripped, felt dizzy and fell, they aren't sure, and hit her head on pavement patio, and her husband found her dead. Swimming, and one of my buddies was screwing with the grate thing over a drain at the bottom. Got his foot stuck and couldn't extricate himself. His brother, cousin, and I nearly drowned trying to free him, so we got to watch him die. Haven't thought about this one in a bit. My uncle was mowing grass on an embankment next to a small body of water. The mower unexpectedly slipped down the embankment and overturned on top of him, pinning him under the water. He drowned in a few feet of water that he otherwise could have stood up in. Edit. Lots of folks asking where, when. Not recent. About 13 years ago in the American Southeast. Based on responses, though, maybe not as much of a freak accident as I thought. Seems to happen a lot. Lovely girl I went to HS with got a scholarship to a prestigious university, being one of the very few students from my shitty school to make it to college or uni. 2 weeks into term, her roommate found her laying in her bed dead. The heating boiler was faulty and she died of carbon monoxide poisoning in her sleep. We'd even thrown a party for her to celebrate her achievement. This was in 1996 and I'm tearing up a bit thinking about this. R.I.P. Sonia. A friend of mine was riding his four-wheeler out at an off-road park. He kicked up a tree branch that impaled him in the thigh. He bled to death before anyone even knew it happened. A mom went ice skating. Little slip, fell, all everyone saw was her bump her head lightly. Family finished skating. On the ride home, she started speaking gibberish. Dad dropped kids at the grandparents, took mom to the ER. Brain swelling, coma, dead a week later. A guy I knew was setting up a rope swing over a lake for his kids and their friends, which he had done many times before. He always would take a practice swing himself before he would let the kids go. His hands slipped off the rope and he fell before he was over the lake. He hit his head on a rock and died in front of the kids. A guy I went to high school with was helping his family do some repairs to a silo on their family farm. A section of the silo's roofing gave way and in he went. Suffocated under thousands of pounds of grain. Teacher in my school lost all 3 kids in a freak traffic accident on the highway. Their car lost a tire, which caused them to swerve into the gas tank of a semi-truck, which exploded, killing 2 of them instantly. The 3rd kid managed to crawl out of the car while he was on fire, and died later in the hospital. The saddest part is that they were all on their way to visit their father in the hospital after his back surgery. A girl I went to grade school with was crushed under a Smith machine at a local gym. 24-hour gym, so no one was around to help. There was a person at the beach who got impaled by a flying beach umbrella. Horrible situation. Her husband was right beside her and she died within seconds. My Sil's aunt died of hypothermia. She went for a walk out in the hills in the winter. She knew the trail very well but got disoriented by a light snowfall and got lost. She got cold and tired, laid down by a rock and died of hypothermia. She was 100 yards from her car. Guy I knew was driving a tractor trailer with a stack of pipe on the back. He swerved to avoid an accident after a car cut him off, went into the ditch, and was cut in half when the load was propelled forward by the inertia from the sudden stop. A guy I went to HS with got hit by a train. It wasn't suicide. It was before Uber and he had been at a party drinking. He did the responsible thing by taking the subway. When he heard the train coming, he stood up to take a step forward like everyone does, but was so drunk that he stumbled over his own feet and fell onto the track. Had an uncle that lived down at the beach, used to spend a lot of time out on a Bertram fishing boat. Many beers were usually enjoyed during those times. They used to go out into deeper water and jump off the flybridge, the roof part of the boat where there are controls as well as a place to sit. One day he went out with some friends and they decided to partake in said jumping. Unbeknownst to him, the tide had gone out and they had drifted into shallow water. He dove in head first, hit the bottom, killed him. Childhood friend of mine drowned, his leg got trapped swimming in a relatively shallow river. He went down and just never came back up. It happened to one of the nicest people I ever knew, and it makes me so mad that we lost touch before I found out what happened. A cousin of mine was electrocuted by a Dr. Pepper machine. His 2 children received $60,000 that their mom lost on bingo. Guy was working on his car, the brake failed, and his head was crushed by the wheel. The tire was off at the time. My insurance guy was pulling a limb out of a large tree with a chain and a rope. He was behind the pickup, his wife was driving the truck. Rope snapped from the strain and chain snapped back and hit him in the head, killing him instantly. He was in his 50s. Nice guy, too. Ironic thing is, this is exactly the sort of scenario he would describe as to why you need life insurance. Had a classmate who was working outside. Got stung by a wasp and had an allergic reaction and died less than 24 hours later. He was married 7 months. They were working on starting a family. His wife had to make the final decision as he was completely brain dead. My childhood friend later, as an adult, fell to his death in Acadia National Park when he fell off a cliff attempting to get a nice picture. Knew a guy who was in a car crash and saw his aunt almost beheaded. He was about 10. Screwed up his mind. At about 20 he flipped his dirt bike with his girlfriend on the back and it cracked her head open. Was deep in the woods camping. She died. Couple years later he was stealing a motorcycle, walking it across the street at night in the rain and got hit by a car. Lost a leg. Couple years after that he was angry at a music venue, so he and a friend tried to build a bomb in a parking lot. It went off and they both were killed. Former co-worker of mine was gored by a bison while on a trail run. Ironically, he often posted on message boards for the park to be aware of wild animals while there, and in one post he said there are too many people with headphones on, or trying to get too close to the bison to take selfies. He was normally very careful apparently. A friend of my dad's was overseeing a repaired braided 3/4 cable being spooled from one drum to another at very high speed and tension. He had his glove turned loosely on the wire, guiding it into position, a big no-no in the industry. A frayed wire came through, snagged his glove and dragged him into the drum, wrapping him into a contorted paste within seconds. He was shortstop in a high school baseball game. Other team hits the ball. Ball hits my friend square in the chest. His heart stopped. They tried to do CPR, but he was gone before the ambulance